So we're at the section on the results of white karma now. I'm thinking about the results of white karma, which there was thinking about the results of black karma or negative karma, and then white, and then another division of karma, or other divisions of karma. That will be a little later. And then that comes from the delineating karma and its results, which is together with the section on the actual 10 results of 10 actions. And those two together, that's the dividing karma and the contemplating its outcome under the divisions. So that section goes together with general contemplation of karma, or the actual general contemplation, which together those form the general contemplation. So together with that is the specific contemplation, which we'll probably get to today, and then having thought about these, then what to engage in, what to abandon. So that is the section, the root of karma, or generating conviction in the root of all goodness, which is a conviction in karma. So, with all of these things, as I keep saying, we have to think about how we can know this, and how is this relevant, is this valid? If we were reading a physics textbook, we would just go one by one. How do we measure mass and density and momentum and so forth? And it would be various equations given and proofs for why these things work, and you could test them out in your life in your experiment, and ascertain that they're valid. So how do we know this, right? It's just a long list of laws. So it's approached quite a different way, and it's not exactly the same as science, right? I've said that. It's not that we should just say this is science, because it's a different way of approaching things, it's a different way of measuring what is known and what is not known. But what is similar to science here is that all of it is understood to be provisional, in that it's something that we have to check and we have to analyze and question, and we don't have to just accept it. And it shouldn't be accepted. It's that if it contradicts something, that we can overturn it somehow. So if it contradicts what we can see directly or experience directly, or if it contradicts reason, if it's not reasonable. So it's very important to analyze this with the reasoning, and then if it contradicts what other things that are said in the scripture. So if the scripture contradicts itself, then both statements can't be correct. So in terms of what we can see, the question is mainly, is it contradict the appearance to us that things are solid and concrete, and that things function independently of our minds. That's understood in both Chittamatra and Madhyamaka philosophy to be a mistaken appearance. But it's something to take seriously. It doesn't, we don't just dismiss this and think that it's all irrelevant and it's all just a dream. It's like a dream, we say, but it's not a dream. Things have functional efficacy. And then in terms of what we can observe, nowadays, what we can observe is more, right? We know more about the workings of the human body, the brain, and so there was a question of, where there seems to be a very strong connection between brain and mind and mental functions. So that is relevant in this context, because if that is conclusively shown to be a causal relation between brain and mind, then the idea of karma is thrown into question. So we have to test it against what we can see and observe. We can look at all the different evidence that's available, but also look at the counter evidence. Is there evidence that suggests that it's not the case, that mind is a product of the brain? And even if there is, it doesn't necessarily mean that karma is true, so we have to try to fit it all in. That's not really what we're doing here when we read the Lamrim, or when we even study the text and debate them. We're more more focused on the second thing, about whether it contradicts reason. But it's something nowadays that we ought to observe or examine because it's available. And then with the what about reason, well, that's when we really start to analyze what it says here, and that's why it's even the things that Tsongkhapa puts together here. It's not directly quoting the Buddha most of the time. It's syntheses that have been put together by many practitioners and scholars of many generations, trying to put this into a codified system that is internally coherent. And all of the different schools, as I think I mentioned in India, their main goal, their main mission was to try to explain how this all works philosophically. So some of that is still quite relevant. Some of their ways of understanding this are not contradicted by new developments that I can see. If some of the small details might be, but overall, it's still quite relevant what they were saying. So we can really think about that in debate and see, and that's why we reject some of the schools, because some of them, when it really is analyzed with reasoning, some of it doesn't work very well in terms of their subtler understanding of how karma works. But that's mainly what we're trying to do here, at least at the start, is just to understand what they're saying. And as we say, you can't really negate another system if you don't understand it, what their actual thesis is. So here we're just getting a broad picture of it. And of course, it's presented in the context of practice, so there's also a part of it where you're thinking about this in terms of your own experience. And what does it mean? So of course, the purpose here in the lower capable being is to essentially generate a sense of apprehension about negative actions. So although we don't have, the stronger our conviction in karma, the stronger that apprehension will be. But even if we don't at this point have a certain apprehension, a certain ascertainment of karma, because it's quite a difficult topic, to whatever extent we feel confidence in it, we can try to cultivate that as part of our practice. And then, of course, the last part about whether it's internally contradictory, well, that's also relevant, because some of the parts of karma, some of the descriptions of karma are said to be very hidden phenomena, and so we have to test them and see, does it make sense? Because even this tradition says that some of it is considered provisional teachings. They're not necessarily the final teaching of the Buddha. So we have to see that they make sense and talk about it. There's nothing wrong with talking about it. So carpe le drema sampalani. So then thinking about the results of white karmic actions. It's quite a short section because it's mostly just the opposite of the other one. So you have the white karma and then that's result. So first of all, white karma. So a person who has thought about the disadvantages or the faults of killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. And then gewe sem tang dempe, so then that person with the virtuous mind, so then they engage in the preparation of restraining themselves, and then the actual restraint, and then tardukpachepa, and then the completion of the action, lugileso. So it's in this context, it's just a restraint of the negatives. Right? There's also the context where there's the opposite, so like giving life and giving generosity. But here it's just talking about, in terms of ethical discipline, it's the restraint from the negative actions. So as I said last time, it's a bit harder to posit exactly what the action is. Right? When did you have an action of not killing? But for example, the preparation would be for taking vows, for one thing, right? Like so taking monastic vows and pledging not to kill the rest of your life. And then the restraint is the continued practice of that. So the Jindu Ngagiji, so likewise are the four non-virtues of speech. Right? So as a Gelong, as a fully ordained monk, you abandon all four. You abandon all three of the bodily actions. That's even lay people, and Getzuls also do that. But then Getzuls, lay people, only abandon of speech, only abandon lying, and not the other three. So we just talked about this in Abhidharma, actually. There's a question of a few things that come into question there. So it's actually talking about lay people, but it's relevant also for Getzuls. So it's there's a few verses there in Zu. And so Lokyam Shindu Mechir Tang, Lachi Mechi Tukjiro, Lachi Mechi Tukjiro, so that first verse is about sexual misconduct. It's saying why, if sexual activity itself is a natural non-virtue, why for lay people was the Buddha restricting sexual misconduct and not sexual activity? So the answer that's given there is because sexual misconduct is, it says first of all, abandoning sexual activity is very difficult. So it's not something most people are going to aspire to be able to do. And then it says that first of all, so Shindu Meiji time, it's very, so but we're talking about sexual misconduct, it says it's a very something that's greatly disparaged in the world, because it has obvious negative consequences for people, and it has negative results. And then Lachir, so it's much easier to abandon sexual misconduct than to abandon sexual activity entirely. Lachir Shin Miche Tokyo. The last reason it says, it's interesting, it says it's also one of the actions that if somebody is an Arya being, they will naturally not do, even if they're reborn. So that it's such a, like we say, a heavy negative action that somebody just wouldn't engage in it if they have that level of realization, even if they haven't received teaching in that lifetime. So then it goes on, but then it says, well, what about Getzuls? Because if it's so hard, it says, yes, but that's for Getzuls. Then because they have the aspiration to practice more, at a higher level, then they're given a harder practice. They're given something that they actually have to work quite hard to maintain. And then it talks about lying. So then it says, Lapa Katamche Egirna, Zundu. So it's saying, why among the four non-virtues? That was how it came to my mind. Why do you abandon, that's the four non-virtues of speech, why do you abandon lying as Getzuls, but you don't have a vow against speaking harshly, or against divisive speech, or against idle chatter? And it says, the reason is that abandoning lying is very important for a monastic, because if you had no vow against lying, then you wouldn't have any hesitation about not confessing if you did something else wrong. See, if you killed somebody, you just say, I didn't do it. Right? So then it helps you to guard your other vows, because you have a sense of having to be honest about your behavior. So it's similar for lay people also, that it's the same reason, actually. It's not just Getzuls, it's given for both lay people and Getzuls there, that it's very protective of the other vows to be able to have to be honest about things. But the other ones are just harder to keep again. So then it's only when you're Gelon that you have vows against those, specifically against the four non-virtues of speech. And then it says about alcohol, Chepe Kanamatu wa Nirgulation Sunchiro. So why do you abandon alcohol? If it's the only prescribed action that lay people have to guard, right? Because it's not naturally non-virtuous to drink alcohol. There's some more discussion about that. Some people thought it was. One class of scholars in India. But the main reason seems to be twofold. One, that you can certainly do it with a neutral motivation, right? Somebody could drink alcohol, for one thing, just not know that it's alcohol, but also just, they're doing it because they're with friends and somebody serves them alcohol and they just have one drink and it's not much. But it says, because the main reason it says it's so why is it not naturally non-virtuous? What's interesting, we just talked about this last night actually. It would appear that
in the Abhidharma system that it's not possible to commit a naturally non-virtuous action in relation to anything other than a sentient being.
So alcohol is not done in relation to a person or any other sentient being. So there's nothing particularly negative. Negativity essentially comes from harm.
And there's nothing harm in alcohol in and of itself. So it's not a naturally non-virtuous action, but then the reason for having to guard it is that it causes you to lose your mindfulness, and so you naturally would break the other vows. So it's very protective again.
So the relation to Sunshiro means by protecting against intoxication, you would protect against
breaking the other vows.
there's quite a long discussion of it there. It's interesting.
But I don't want to get too distracted here.
So anyway, the point here is Nagi Shis, you have the 4 non-virtues of speech, and then Igi Sum, so then for 3 non-virtues of mind, Tialam Jarde, so apply the same reasoning to them. So it's pledging yourself to guard yourself from those. Now again, if you take monastic vows, you're not
obligated to guard yourself against the non-virtues of mind per se.
So it says the definition of a pratimoksha vow is Yidun Sambagichena, Yidun Sambaginchene, Shina Shidan Shipale, Dupadiga Lumagle, Suchininche Dupatam, which means that you're protecting yourself against harm, which is talking about the first 7 non-virtues, and then the basis of harm, which is the latter 3, the non-virtues of mind, which are the basis for harming. So then there's quite some question about what does that mean, because you don't actually have any vow. And your monastic vows are purely about your body and speech.
And you cannot cause a downfall with your mind. However, if you
have the intention to steal, or the intention to kill, for example, that's called the danji niche. It means something you should guard against.
But you don't actually have to confess it. There's nothing confessable that is purely done with your mind.
But nevertheless, of course, it's encouraged to
guard against the non-virtues of mind. But in the bodhisattva vows and the tantric vows, then you do have mental restraints, right?
Like you can break your root tantric vows with just your mind,
in terms of
your attitude towards your teacher, mainly.
And your root bodhisattva vows. If you give up bodhicitta, you lose your bodhisattva vows. And that's why there's no ritual for giving back the bodhisattva vows. There's 2 reasons for that.
One is that it's considered a very negative action to do so.
Giving back your monastic vows is neutral. It's good if you can keep them, but giving them back itself is not a negative action. Whereas giving up bodhicitta or bodhisattva vows is considered a negative action because you pledge to work for sentient beings and then they're reneging on your pledge. But also that as soon as you generate the thought, I'm not going to keep them, you lose them. So there's no need to give them back.
There's nothing to do. That's also, it says, why you take them again and again, because it's so hard to keep them.
It's so hard to maintain that you can take them over and over again. Whereas you don't take monastic vows. I mean, if you give up your vows and take them again, that's a different question. But you don't take monastic vows and then take them again next year to restore them or to strengthen them.
And how about the tantric vows? Can you give back also or not?
Well, it's sort of the same idea with the I mean, what you can do, giving back, not per se, but like with commitments, they say, if you really can't keep a commitment or you just can't follow the teacher's advice,
you can go to the teacher and explain the reasons for that, right? But like literally giving back the tantric vow per se is, I've never heard of that. And again, I think it's the same understanding because it's not.
One of the reasons also giving up your monastic vows is that, of course, celibacy is one of the major vows.
And so, if you really feel you don't want to live a celibate lifestyle anymore, that's a very major part of your life. Whereas with tantric vows, again, it's mostly about your mind. So, you know, you want to say, well, I want to have a negative mind towards my teacher, I want to give up love for other sentient beings. It's sort of, unless you really don't want to be a Buddhist anymore and you just want to give up this entire lifestyle, it's sort of in accordance with it. But it's, yeah, it's a good question actually, because I just put together that whole section in the book about the Bodhisattva and Tantric vows, and there's nothing in there about that question. There's only about the Bodhisattva vows in Tsongkhapa's commentary.
And one more thing.
Yeah,
For example, the basis for the Tantric vows is the Bodhisattva vows, right?
Right.
So if you think, oh, I want to give up bodhicitta, you automatically lost. The
Yeah, it's
Tantric
also
vows.
one of your tantric vows, right? You know your tantric vows, right?
Yes.
I can't say it here actually, because not everyone might have the vows, but one of them is that, right? Give up bodhicitta, lose your tantric vows, it's one of the vows. So, that's probably included here, that's my point. He's talking about restraining yourself from these negative actions of body and speech. Because in the bodhisattva vows specifically, right, in the secondary bodhisattva vows, you have dope semgi jesujuk and trope semgi jesujuk. Those are two of the secondary bodhisattva vows. So following after thoughts of desire, which is this right here, this napsen, right, the covetousness. And then trope semgi jesujuk is following after thoughts of anger, which is right here, the harmful intent. So it doesn't just mean following, like acting on it. It means not implying an antidote, just seeing it as not a problem and cultivating that thought. Right? It's not having the thought, right? That's an important point. If you have a thought, you had a thought, so you can do something about it, but you don't have to beat up on yourself. But if you then cultivate it, I think this is a good way to think and increase that. That is one of the secondary faults for having bodhisattva vows.
One more question.
Yeah, okay.
For example, if a person wants to give up Buddhism and so forth,
Yeah.
and, I don't believe anymore in Bodhisattva vows and bodhicitta
Yeah,
and
okay.
blah blah blah. So he still creates negative karma with that?
Yeah.
He doesn't have more faith in the view
I mean,
and so forth,
it's-
I want to try something different,
Well, it
Like we do the Christian,
essentially, yeah.
these sort of things.
Well,
I don't
okay,
believe
it is,
in
yeah,
God
again,
anymore
you
and
have to
so
say it's a
forth.
complex thing, right?
Mm.
But essentially, yes. Yeah, for one thing, generating wrong views also. Those are the two ways you lose your bodhisattva vows with your mind, is to generate wrong views or to give up bodhicitta. And so wrong views are considered, as we talked about earlier, it's considered the heaviest negative action in a lot of ways because it obstructs you from creating virtue. So in that case, the person has pledged to work for sentient beings and then their view causes them to give that up, right? But we have to look at exactly what's going on there, right? So what if the person says, I really want to help everyone, I really want to make the world a better place. It's just, I've discovered after many years of investigation, I cannot accept reincarnation. And it's sort of like, and then we say, well, they should just not be true to themselves. It's a complex question. My own experience from looking at it over many years, not that many years, I'm not that old, but looking at really some people who turn away from Buddhism, it's, somebody could say that I'm biased, and maybe, I don't know, but this is my own feeling from my own side, is that it usually seems to be a lot more about something personal than about a philosophical standpoint in and of itself. As generally is the case in life. I think people adopt various positions based on a lot of reasons. It's never just purely out of pure reason. That's pretty unusual. And so oftentimes it appears to me, at least in some cases I can think of, where there's something that the person is really just unable to deal with it within themselves. And then so then it becomes, if I believe this, then I won't experience this feeling anymore, or this pattern of behavior, which it's not to blame them per se, and it's not to say, so the question, as you said, what if they go to another tradition, right? I certainly have nothing against other traditions, and I'm actually quite open to the possibility of people in other forms of Buddhism and even other religions having very positive results of their practice and cultivating, going in a positive direction, and even the possibility, well, maybe they go on some kind of path. I don't know, but it's seems very reasonable to me. But the idea of, from what I've observed, it seems that often the switching paths halfway is usually not very helpful. It's like the traditional analogy, I might even said it before here, it's like if you want to dig a well, you dig many small holes, you don't get the water, right? And so it's ultimately about your own mind, whatever you do. And so if you commit to one path, it's never going to be perfect. But you have the opportunity to work with your mind again and again over many years in a how do you say, not a closed space, but like a focused system, right? Where if you keep changing around, it's like you're always giving your mind a way of getting out of the situation without actually being able to clearly see your own patterns of behavior. So whether one path is right or wrong is less about being right or wrong and more about just focusing on what you're doing. But maybe there are cases, right? Especially if it's like in the first few years when somebody is a new monk or new nun or whatever. There might be cases where it really is beneficial for them to follow a different path, and I'm trying to think of situations where that has happened. And as I say, it's interesting, I can't think of any, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen, right? It might be possible. Especially before you've actually committed to one. Then of course, I think it's good to kind of look back and forth, but anyway, the fundamental point about giving up bodhicitta, right, if we think about it in the traditional sense of what it means, it's like you commit that I want to follow a bodhisattva path, I want to work for the benefit of others, and then you turn away from that, if it's in the literal sense of that. You decide I just want to focus on myself, and I don't really want to be taking responsibility for others. Then it's considered a quite heavy action. So, yeah, anyway, I don't want. It's a very deep question, and we can talk about it a different time. I don't want to get too distracted with it, but it's something. I think maybe the issue you're having is that it can feel a bit like a closed, like it's like, how do you say? It's kind of reinforcing itself. If it's saying, well, anybody who doesn't believe in us is wrong, right? Then it becomes very much like, almost like a fundamentalism. So
Yeah.
I don't think it should be that way. I don't think, as I was saying, intellectually it's one question, but then observing what actually happens, right? Observing people who do that and see, is it really purely an intellectual thing, or how much of it has to do with their own mind? And it also shows why it's really useful early on to come to examine these things closely, not just leave it on faith. And even as you go along, continue to do so, right? And I personally feel that the evidence of the strength, not just evidence, but also the strength of the system is quite profound. And it's hard for me to see somebody just rejecting it purely on logical reasoning. In terms of some of the traditional exaggerations, these kind of hyperboles in the sutras and so forth, which oftentimes in the tradition are not tend to be taken literally anyway. I agree that I often myself approach those with some reservation. And there's certainly that there's nothing in the system that I just accept right away, right? But I think it requires quite a lot of effort to keep looking at it and keep examining it, right? It could be a kind of laziness to say, well, it doesn't make any sense, that doesn't work for me. And you have to look quite closely at what's going on. And also, as I said, this is why I think observing the other evidence that is there is useful, right? Just to kind of, it's this kind of taking it on faith the other way, where you say that, well, modern science and modern understanding know that this all is false. Well, how do you understand the modern position on that? Do you have a deep understanding of
how science works and in what way it's undermined this, then
That's something to examine, and I think it's
good to check into that. And
I think
I at least as I say, I don't know of anyone.
personally that did that and then came to the conclusion that this is false.
It does challenge us though, because it challenges us to see that some of it,
Might be cultural, some of it might be certain assumptions that are no longer tenable. And so we have to be willing to accept that, or be willing to work with that.
that's why we debate every year. That's what you see as a big advantage here.
You never said, it's not about accepting creeds, and it's not about just dismissing your questions. You're really encouraged to ask them every day, and to learn how to ask them in a more focused way.
Yeah. So, continuing on. So the Kiprani, so he's saying, what is the difference here between we talked about this, the virtues of the body, now of speech and of mind. Nagile tanhigile shechao. So the only difference, okay, this is now called karma of speech and karma of mind. The point being that none of them is obvious, right? This is why it's said in the system, it's called the Virikshi Mahi Besuk, it's non-revealing form, right? So, not killing somebody is considered a physical action, it's considered a bodily virtue, but you're not doing anything, you're just sitting in a chair or whatever you're doing. But it's the non-action that is the action, right? The restraint, it says, whatever force you have, so you can think of it, what do they mean by a non-revealing form, right? There's some force that's restraining you. You could say, well, it's your mind, you don't have the intention to do it, which is true. But the understanding, at least in the Vaibhashika system, is that there it's like you have the force of your intention to do it is being blocked by the force of your intention not to do it. So it's like a dam blocking a river. Right? So what is actually restraining your body is physical. It's a subtle kind of physical form, is what they call it. Whether that makes sense is questionable, but it's actually, in the end, it's both useful, it's both important and not important. It's not important in the general sense, it's very irrelevant to just deciding I'm not going to kill, and then you have to get all these little details about what is that, what kind of form is it. But if you want to talk about the actual nature of karma and how it functions, then it becomes more relevant. Again, we try to actually talk about, can this be posited within our understanding of the way the world, the universe functions? And it's interesting to see what they thought about it. And they weren't, as I've said many times, these people were not just, they were not gullible people. Like they didn't just posit things in a haphazard way. They gave a lot of thought and debated about why they said these things. Saimuji Sungpe. So this is saying, this talks about this in Saimuji, the text from the grounds by Asanta. Shi tang sampa tang jor tang tadipanam curic vajaris. You can apply this to all the same factors as before: the basis, the intention, the action, and the completion. Right, so sokchapapama lelasona, lasona. So we can take as an example abandoning killing. So shini sentient general. So the basis is other sentient beings. Right, so it says again in Zod, Dompa sentient tamche le, who's saying that you restrain yourself in regard to all sentient beings. The point being that you don't think I'm not going to kill these people. You think I'm not going to kill anything or anybody. Right? It's not just one particular branch of that. And then sampani, nimik tone. So what is the intention? Is that you see the faults, nimik tone, ponwadogo, and then you wish to abandon the action. And then jorvani, so the action is supa yanda pradampe tucheto. So it's the compounding factor, which means the karma of restraining yourself thoroughly from killing. And then tartukni yanda pradamper zuka legizueso. So then it's the completion of not doing, of having
restrain yourself. So they shen yang shepherd child, so understand from that the other one. What does it mean to restrain yourself from stealing and so forth? So then Drake will assume, right? So you can think about it, again, we think about how is it formed. Well, it also is a bit habitual tendency, right? In the future lifetime, that person is going to be, just have a natural force almost that restrains them, because of that habit of doing that. I like this analogy, is not the right word. What they use in the Sikh tradition. You know what the Sikhs are, right? I'm sure he does, but you know? Yeah. So, right, the Sikhs used to all carry swords in early times. That was pretty, not in the very early times, but later generations, there was a time when they were all carrying swords. It was a standard thing. It was probably what most people did in old times. But they were concerned about, of course, acting virtuously, not using their sword for just a pointless reason. So it says that's why they wear the heavy metal bracelet on their wrist, the men, because it's heavy. So you have to think before you raise your hand. You pull your sword out of the sheath. So nowadays they don't carry the sword, but they still wear the bracelet. But it's a useful. That's the practice of mindfulness. You remember this heaviness. So it's like that with the vows. There's something restraining. You have to think twice before you do something, and there's a sense of restraint about it. It's like when you're on your road, right? You think twice before raising your arm and hitting somebody. You look at yourself as you're a monk, and you realize that doesn't fit with what I pledged to do. So that is the restraint that's holding you down. So as it gets stronger, as your mind gets stronger, and as your habit gets stronger. Dribble the sumai. So the result has three. So that's the naming dribble, the ripened result, and the dakbo dribble, the environmental result, and the gundige dribble, which is the result in accordance with the